Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn feminist criticism and the theories based on feminist writing in the book Beginning Theory by Peter Barry. This video will give you an overview of the important terms and concepts of feminism, which will be helpful for the beginners and the researchers. Feminist criticism is the result of the women's movement of 1960s, which began in United States as women's rights movement or women's liberation movement. This movement demanded equal rights and opportunities for women in education, workplace, politics, and also voting rights. The important books that dealt with the women's inequality in society are Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Olive Schreiner's Women and Labor, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. The male writers who contributed to feminist writing are John Stuart Mill through his work The Subjection of Woman and Friedrich Engels through his work The Origin of the Family. Feminist, female and feminine. As Torelmoy defines, the term feminist refers to the political position. Female deals with a matter of biology. Feminine denotes the set of culturally defined characteristics. Feminist criticism in 1970s exposed the mechanisms of patriarchy, that is sexual inequality. Critical attention was given to books by male writers and how women were portrayed in their writings. Therefore, the criticism during 1970s was combative and critical. During 1980s, there were many changes in the feminist critical perspective. Firstly, feminist criticism became much more eclectic. That is, it began to draw upon the findings and approaches from other kinds of criticism, for example, from Marxism, structuralism, linguistics, and so on. Secondly, it focused on exploring the nature of the female world instead of attacking male versions of the world. It began to reconstruct the lost or suppressed records of female experience. Thirdly, special attention was given to create a new standard of women's writing by rewriting the history of the novel and poetry in such a way that the neglected women writers were given new prominence. Elaine Showalter described the change in the late 1970s as the shift of attention from andro texts, that is, books by men, to gyno-texts, that is, books written by women. She coined the term Gynocritics. It refers to the study of gyno-text, that is, the text written by women. Elaine Showalter categorizes different phases in women's writing throughout the history. The first one is Feminine Phase, which was between 1840 to 1880. The second one is Feminist Phase, between 1880 to 1920. And the third one is Female Phase, from 1920 onwards. The feminine phase is when the women writers imitated dominant male artistic norms and aesthetic standards. The feminist phase is a phase in which radical and often separatist positions are maintained. Female phase focus particularly at female writing and female experience. Peter Barry says that it is complex to identify the reason for phasing. He explains the first reason as that the terminology has given theoretical acclaim to feminist studies. It ensures proper credit and recognition for feminist criticism. It allows one to be clear and specific about its approach instead of having a generalized approach. Debates and disagreements in feminist criticism since 1970s have focused on three particular areas, that is, the role of theory, the nature of language, and the value of psychoanalysis. Let us consider each of the disagreement in detail. Feminist criticism and the role of theory. There was always a conflict as to what type of theory that feminist criticism should highlight. We have Anglo-American criticism, English feminist criticism, and also French feminist criticism. Anglo-American feminists were doubtful about the recent critical theory. Their major interest was in traditional critical concepts like theme, motive, and also characterization. They accept the conventions of literary realism. They also insist in close reading. Their ideals are similar to liberal humanist approach to literature. However, they use historical data and non-literary materials such as diaries, memoir, social and medical history to understand the literary text. The important Anglo-American feminists are Elaine Showalter, Sandra Gilbert, Susan Beauvoir, Patricia Stubbs, Rachel Brownstein. English feminist criticism is different from that of Anglo-American feminism. It is socialist feminist in its approach. It is associated with cultural materialism and Marxism. The major English feminist works are Terry Lowell's Consuming Fiction, Julia Swindell's Victorian Writing and Working Women, Sea Changes, Culture and Feminism by Cora Kaplan, an American who worked in Britain for many years. Kaplan was a member of the Marxist Feminist Literature Collective, which was a group that indicates strong political and theoretical interests of feminist criticism. An important personality associated with the group Literature Teaching Politics Collective is Catherine Belsey for her work The Subject of Tragedy, and John Milton, Language, Gender, Power. They are part of socialist feminist British tradition. Anglo-American and British socialist feminist criticism. Anglo-American tradition appeared in the late 1970s, while British socialist feminist tradition has produced its key works in the middle of 1980s and remains active and influential. The French feminists adopted and adapted various critical theories like post-structuralist and psychoanalytic criticism. It is clearly theoretical. It takes a perception of major post-structuralists, especially Lacan, Foucault, and Derrida. The literary text is never a representation of reality or of personal experience. The prime concern of French feminists is outside literature. They write about language, representation, psychology, and also other major philosophical issues before dealing the literary text itself. The major French feminists are Julia Kristeva for her 1974 interview on Women Can Never Be Defined, Elaine for her work The Laugh of the Medusa, and Luz Irigaray for the work The Sex Which Is Not One. Feminist criticism and language. Language, is it feminine or masculine? Virginia Woolf, in her work A Room of One's Own, says that language is gendered. She says there is no common sentence ready for her use. Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot have tried to use the language but were not successful. Jane Austen has tried to reject men's language and she devised language for her own use. The characteristic of women's sentence is that the clauses are linked in looser sequence instead of being balanced and patterned as in male prose. Language needs to be a medium to express one's thought and feeling. It should be free from bias, but the language is constructed by men to express their views. Dale Spender, in her work Man-Made Language, in the year 1981 says that language is not a neutral medium because it is influenced by men, that is, it has patriarchal domination. The French theorists have proposed Ecriture Feminine. It was a term coined by French theorist Elaine in her essay The Laugh of the Medusa. She stresses free play of meanings and loosened grammatical structures. Julia Kristeva says that there are two different aspects of language to explain Ecriture Feminine in her essay The System and the Speaking Subject. They are symbolic and semiotic. The symbolic aspect is associated with authority, order, father, repression, and control. This aspect reminds us of the structuralists who insist in orderly strict structures and also Saussurean network of differences. The semiotic aspect is characterized not by logic or order. It is linked with maternal rather than the paternal. Kristeva sees the semiotic as a language of poetry as opposed to prose. Feminist Criticism and Psychoanalysis. Kate Millett, in her work Sexual Politics in the year 1969, condemns Freud as a prime source of the patriarchal attitude against which feminists must fight. Freud was defended by Juliette Michel's work Psychoanalysis and Feminism in 1974. This book defends Freud by differentiating between sex and gender. She says sex is a matter of biology, while gender is something that is learned or acquired rather than being natural. Simone de Beauvoir insists the same distinction in the famous first sentence in part 2 of her work The Second Sex, which was written in 1949. As she says, one is not born a woman, rather one becomes a woman. Rehabilitation of psychoanalysis can be found in the works of Jane Gallup's Feminism and Psychoanalysis, Jacqueline Rose in her work The Haunting of Sylvia Plath, Jerry Allen Flieger's Changing Subjects, The Making of Feminist Literary Criticism. What does the feminist critics do? The feminist critics' prime aim is to rediscover texts written by women. They also revalue women's experience. They examine representations of women in literature by both men and women. They challenge representations of women as other. They examine power relations in texts and in life with a view to break them down. The feminist critics recognize the role of language. They raise the question whether men and women are different because of biology or by social construct. They explore whether female language, that is Ecriture Feminine, is also available to men. They reread psychoanalysis to further explore the issue of female and male identity. They make clear the ideological base of neutral or mainstream literary interpretations. Here is a reference for further study. As always, thanks for listening and thanks for your time. Thank you.